Aggie Shambra is there.
She said that she understood this was a difficult decision, said she was not immune to the arguments many in this room had made, but she thought this was the right decision, and she blamed, as you'd expect, the Conservatives and the reckless decisions that she said they made.
The Princess of Wales says her focus is on staying cancer-free. She's finished chemotherapy after being diagnosed with the disease following stomach surgery. Kate has released a video statement, which you can see on lbc.co.uk. Government officials are looking into whether to release a convicted killer who served 27 years for murdering a woman on Christmas Day in 1997. The parole board's recommending Stephen Ling is let out, but the mother of his victim, Joanne Tulip, who was stabbed 60 times, is describing the decision as outrageous. And British Paralympians are calling for disabled children to have equal access to school sport. They arrived back in London today after finishing second in the medal table in Paris. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 89 points at 82.70. The pound buys $1.30 and €1.18. LBC weather, rain pushing across the north tonight, clearing to showers as it moves southeastwards. Drier in the south with a few showers in the west. A low of 5. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
Winter fuel allowance and the row that will not go away. And let's bring to the conversation Sharon Graham, who's General Secretary of the Unite Union.
Leadership is about choices, and he needs to come back from the choice that they've made on the winter fuel allowance. We shouldn't be picking the pocket of pensioners and at the same time leaving the most rich and wealthiest in our society completely untouched. They need to do a U-turn on the policy, Nick.
Keith in Westerham in Kent.
I think that this winter fuel tax cut is an absolute ridiculous thing. I mean, they're making the Sheriff of Nottingham look like a philanthropist.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7.
With Betfair, where odds move faster than polls. Play responsibly.
LBC. This is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. This is Cross Question.
And it's Simon Marks sitting in once again for Ian Dale and once again in the chair for Cross Question. If you are new to all of this, this is your opportunity to put questions to a panel of prominent guests who are here to address anything that is on your mind. We do this every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday night at 8 p.m. and it is your opportunity to set the agenda by phoning in or texting your questions to us. Alongside me tonight, Sir Alec Shelbrooke, Conservative Shadow Transport Minister and MP for Wetherby and Easingwold. Layla Moran, the Liberal Democrats' Foreign Affairs and International Development spokesperson. She's the MP for Oxford West and Abingdon, and she's just been elected as chair of the Health Select Committee. She'll be telling us about her plans for that role, I'm sure. Congratulations. Thank you. Also with us, the broadcaster Sir Trevor Phillips, a former chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and Ella Whelan, columnist for Spiked Online. And you can ask them anything you like. We think some of you may still have questions about winter fuel payments. We were discussing that in the last hour. As some trade unions pressure the government to back down, maybe you want to ask the panel their views on whether Keir Starmer is correct when he asserted over the weekend that his government is going to have to be unpopular. Or Tom Tugendhat's criticism of his own party for, in his words, shouting at foreigners from the White Cliffs of Dover. Perhaps you're still simmering over fresh evidence of sewage being pumped into the country's waterways, or you're on the edge of your seats over tomorrow night's debate in the United States between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Whatever question you've got, we are waiting for it here on Cross Question. And remember that while you are more than welcome to listen to us on the radio, you can also watch us. We are streaming live in high definition right now on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch on Global Player. This is LBC.
And our first question on Cross Question tonight comes from Lee in Maidstone. Good evening, Lee.
Hello, Simon.
What would you like to ask the panel?
I'm just a little bit concerned about how this democracy seems to work. I vote for my local MP to represent us in Parliament, and yet when they get there, they're told and forced not to be able to represent us, and they've got to toe the party line. I'm pretty sure my MP doesn't agree with the scrapping the winter fuel, but he's going to have to vote that way, or he can't represent me going forward in the capacity that he's supposed to.
And Lee, just expand on that just a bit. You want your MP to vote how? Against the government tomorrow?
Well, yeah, I think he's meant to represent the constituents, but they're basically being told they can't represent the constituents.
So abstaining's not good enough for you?
They've got to support the two people at the top of the government, which doesn't really seem is what we voted for, does it?
OK, Lee. So Alec Shelbrooke, let's start with you on this. What is the Conservatives' position on this, and particularly on the situation where Labour MPs are basically being warned not to vote no tomorrow?
Well, I mean, this is always, people say, we elect an MP individually and they should vote how we want them to vote. But, of course, that's not the reality. And there have been some examples in this election more than ever before, but very rarely are there elections where people outperform their party. If I had stood as an independent in this election, I would not be an MP. I mean, let's be blunt, it's lucky to be an MP anyway with a Conservative name. But, this has always been the perennial problem. And when you're in government especially, people have elected a Labour government. Now, in order for that Labour government to do what it wants to do, it needs the MPs who are there to back it to do it. And we've had 14 years where, there were times you've seen rebellions, especially when, in the Brexit days, etc. Ultimately, that just destroys your party. Ultimately, we have had an absolute hiding at the election because we didn't all row in the same direction as the leadership. And so people have elected a Labour government more than they've elected an individual MP, and that now will come home true. So I think the one thing I would say, though, is never at any point in the general election did Labour indicate they were going to take away the winter fuel allowance. And of course, go over it all, but I mean, they were pretty vocal about this at previous elections when they thought we might be doing it, and painting about how many people would die, etc. So I think they've got themselves into a bit of a pickle here.
Layla Moran, Lee wants his MP to be able to vote his conscience.
I think that there's always a tension there as an MP about what your party's telling you to do and then the conscience, but also what your constituents want you to do. And actually, when I make my decisions about what I do, my constituents go top. So I look at what I've been hearing on doors when I've been outdoor knocking. I look into my inbox and, there have been so many people really concerned about the winter fuel allowance. Liberal Democrats, for clarity, will be voting against that cut when the votes come tomorrow, because it's not just the most wealthy pensioners. People are focused on the most wealthy pensioners. Actually, the vast majority of people who are going to be affected by this are just about scraping by, and we don't feel it's the right thing to do. So I, in part, became a Lib Dem because I knew about the whipping, I knew about the party system, and when the time came that I decided, right, I'm going to put all my efforts into getting elected, I chose my party really carefully because I knew there'd be moments where there'd be those moments of tension. And I chose the Liberal Democrats because I studied their manifestos, their policies, and I thought to myself, actually, that's what I really believe. And I remember even at the time, my parents going, are you sure? Is that the right thing for your career? And actually, no, I put my conscience first. So I've never really had that as a problem as a Liberal Democrat because I chose when I first went into politics that I was going to absolutely go with my heart, and I'm really pleased every single day that I did that.
But I do remember the tuition fees vote when the Liberal Democrats were in power, and there is a difference when you are in power as to the freedom you have. Because I know you came in 15?
I came in 17, yeah.
17. So it comes back to this question of the government. It's not party political. The government wants to get its agenda through, and that created a lot of tension at the time, obviously.
Right, Trevor Phillips, what's your view on this? Because we do know for certain that some Labour members of Parliament up and down the country have been hearing an earful on the doorstep about this and are now being told pretty much the best you can do is abstain.
Yeah, look, there are two different levels at which you can think about this. One is I'm glad that you've got philosophers calling in. Lee's raising questions first raised by Edmund Burke back in the 18th century, and the famous Conservative philosopher, and he said that your representative, I looked it up here, your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment. And he betrays you if instead of serving you, he sacrifices it to your opinion, i.e., you elect people who know what they're doing, are informed, and sometimes they're going to vote for something which isn't that popular. So I think the idea that MPs are just sent there to represent what is supposed to be the popular opinion has never been true. And in any case, by and large, how do they know? I mean, the point about politics is that it's about division. And in any constituency, there will be a division of opinion. In this particular case, if I may say so, I think that this is all being flanned up a bit much. Labour is going to win. It's going to get the plan through. There's not any doubt that that's going to happen. Secondly, the truth of the matter is it going to make that much difference? The government is spending 1.2 trillion. This is supposed to help in filling a 22 billion hole, which is tiny, and it's a tiny bit of the 22 billion. So actually, at some level, it's irrelevant. And the third thing, I'll shut up in a second, that most surprises me is that what this does is take a little bit of money from people like me, who are pensioners, who have done fantastically well, frankly, over the last decade, whose pensions have gone up ahead of earnings in every single year, who are going to get another 400 quid in the next 6 months. The thing that surprises me, the Labour Party, which I thought was supposed to be a party of distribution, redistribution, should be saying, actually, this is the way we pay more money to poor health workers, and the quarter of the people, of pensioners who are millionaires in this country, honestly, look at this in context.
Ella Whelan.
Well, I think the difference between when Burke was making those comments and the era of Starmer and Macron and all of the technocrats which now run politics is that there was some sense of ideological vision within party politics then. And now, the reason why something like the winter fuel allowance matters is not actually because it's any sort of it's not. We shouldn't fetishise it as this wonderful thing. It's a subsidy which is meant to be fixing a problem, which is that fuel is very expensive, and pensions. Even there's a lot talked up, particularly from my generation and younger, about how good old people have got it. No, lots of them don't, and pensions are an individual thing, and if your partner passes away, you suddenly lose half your income. It's not, they're not sat at home having a good time, eating fancy food, doing nothing. That's a bit of a lie about pensioners. But the difference today is that I have seen no argument from the Labour Party about why ideologically they've decided to do this. The arguments that Rachel Reeves or Starmer or even, people like Diana Johnson have been on the airwaves this morning with a kind of some kind of figurative shotgun in her back saying, say it, that they agree with this announcement is because of what? It's because it's Liz Truss's fault, or it's because we have to do it, or because there's no other option. It's an incredibly negative technocratic argument, which I think is part of the reason why it has caused such a fuss, because there isn't a clear there's no sort of political plan here. There's no sense of there's no even sense of we have to do this now to plug this black hole, and it will help us in our plans to do X, Y, and Z, and your lives are going to get better in the future. I'm bored of Starmer saying how bad my life's going to get. I mean, it's actually mundane how miserable he's being at this point, and so I think that's the problem. It tells you more about the Labour Party and the character of the Labour Party than it does about anything substantial to do with the economy. And just on Lee's question, again, I don't, MP's conscience and all the rest of that Layla talked about is fine for an MP. That's their own individual pursuit. But as a voter, you have an idea that you're voting for an individual, but they're part of a party that's meant to have, again, a vision. And so that tension is meaningful because the tension is not between you as an individual and your sense of your career or something and your constituents. It's a sense of an ideological vision that you're buying into as a voter. And obviously that was lacking with the Conservatives, who no single Conservative ever agreed on anything. I think probably the same, to a lesser degree, is true with the Labour Party. So at the end, it does now matter what individual we vote for, because in a way, MPs are acting like independents within political parties these days.
George W. Bush used to call the vision thing. Layla Moran, in light of your new position, chairing the Health Committee, there are some members of Parliament, Labour members of Parliament, who oppose this move, saying that they believe it's a public health issue. It's not just a tax issue. It is going to be a choice between heating and eating. What's your view on that?
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, I was elected all of 3 hours ago, but I understand.
It still counts.
It does still count, and now I have to, But my understanding is, and I was just checking, there was a report actually done by the Health and Social Care Committee on this in the last Parliament. It was on prevention in healthcare, and it pointed towards the policies within the Levelling Up and housing ministry, because things like housing, things like places, things like people's ability to be able to access high quality life in general, including housing, is incredibly important. And people's ability to heat their homes as part of that and be healthy in their homes is a way that we can, in the longer term, save money in the NHS. So it has been looked at, is my understanding, by the committee. I wasn't sitting on it at the time. But, I mean, they're not entirely wrong in their assessment. I think the discussion for me, though, needs to be about not everyone does live in a home that would qualify for that. And, you know, Trevor shouldn't be getting it. In fact, many of the pensioners in my constituency choose to give it to charity every single year, and they write into the local paper and they say, right, the winter fuel allowance has come. Everyone who can afford it, give it away so that other people can use it.
Do you know how difficult it is to give it away? I mean, it's an absolute outrage that I would be getting that money, but it's very, very difficult to actually give it away.
So I wish the conversation was about, you know, what's the right level, Layla. It does feel like we haven't had that chance to have that conversation as a Parliament. I think if it had been done in a very considered way, I do think that they'd find support in Parliament for it, but the way that it's been so blanketly done has caused the problem.
OK, more of your questions for our tremendous panel tonight. Sir Alec Shelbrooke, Conservative MP, Layla Moran, Liberal Democrat MP, the broadcaster Sir Trevor Phillips, and Ella Whelan, a columnist for Spiked Online. You can call us at 0345 6060 973, or you can text your questions at 84850. You can even ask Alexa to send a message to LBC, where the time is now 17 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
And our next question tonight for the panel comes from John in Wimbledon. John, good evening.
Good evening, all. My question is, do you think Labour will also scrap the single-person discount on council tax along with making the winter fuel changes?
And to put that question into context, John, last week, Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, was asked in Parliament whether the government intends to scrap the 25% council tax discount, which people who live alone are eligible for, and she did not rule out this happening. Trevor Phillips, is that another one of these tough choices, these difficult moments that Keir Starmer's going to be facing?
Well, I don't think that the choice they're making over the winter fuel allowance is particularly difficult, by the way. I don't think it's particularly tough. There's not going to be any blowback on this. I mean, there will be a lot of fuss and a lot of shouting and yelling tomorrow, but it's not going to lose them any votes. Scrapping the single-person discount, I think, might. And the reason I think it might, I don't know quite how much money is involved, but it's not going to be a lot. But the people it will affect will be very young people who, in my view, basically get a pretty raw deal. I, for example, going back to our earlier discussion, will never take the so-called Freedom Pass. I think it's ridiculous that well-off Londoners get to travel free, and kids who are at university can't afford to get on the tube. It's just mad, and it's just the most pathetic piece of politics around, that nobody will attack this on the grounds that old people vote and young people don't. I mean, shocking. On this one, the other people who I think will suffer will be people who live alone because their partners have died. And I think that is a group of people you do not want to get into political scrap with, because you'll lose.
Ella Whelan?
Well, I agree with that, but I just don't see it. I mean, maybe it's because you're a Labour man, Trevor, and I'm not party affiliated.
I'm completely neutral, as you know, Ella.
But for me,
we can't all be trapped by our history.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But for me, when I was listening on the way in, and you had that discussion with the Labour MP
Josh Simons,
yeah, and a caller texted in or called in and told you that sounded like he cared more about party cohesion than things.
Yes.
And that's what struck me as well. And I think the way in which we talk about these people who are involved in Westminster politics always talk about this in terms of election wins and votes and things like that, as if it's abstract from what this whole game is meant to be about, which is politics that affect people's daily lives. I don't want to get too kumbaya about it, but that is why we're all here at the end of the day, isn't it? Rather than this just being sort of Westminster parlour games. And I think it can feel like Westminster parlour games. I mean, the problem with the whole the debate about whipping and whether or not the MPs who 40 or 50 are going to get penalised, is it sort of you're meant to be able to convince your fellow parliamentarians that an idea is popular or necessary because of it standing on its own weight, rather than having to force them. And any kind of political argument for what essentially is kind of, as most people experience it, austerity, that argument is not being had. Every single MP from the Labour Party has used the phrase difficult decisions. It doesn't mean, it's an empty, meaningless phrase, difficult decision.
Unpopular decisions, as the Prime Minister couched it over the weekend.
Yeah, you're I mean, I think the Labour Party, along with lots of Conservatives, by the way, has a problem with democracy, but when you're sort of fetishising the idea or making a virtue out of the idea of unpopularity, there's something going wrong there. And I think the austerity point is important because...
I think it's a bit unfair, though, isn't it? I mean, the point about politics is it is always about choice. And the choices in politics are always the difficult ones, or else we wouldn't need politics. If it was always a choice between good and bad, you wouldn't need Layla and Alex.
There was just one right answer at BBC, wouldn't there?
The point about politics is that there's always a choice, and it's almost always between bad and worse.
But if you look,
I think it's a bit unfair.
But if you look at the choice that's being given at the moment, the Labour Party's line from pre-election campaigning period has been, "There's nothing we can do." Blame it on the previous government, fair enough. No, sorry, Alex, but you weren't very good. That's fair enough. But then saying there's literally nothing we can do, don't look to us, we can make our government policy is going to be that we will do nothing, or even better, that your lives are going to get worse. And there's this whole kind of idea of we all have to just tighten our belts a little bit, and what will happen? Things will get, maybe the sun will come out tomorrow. That's Labour's sort of position, and that's not a choice. It's not popular, but it's also not a choice. It's just a kind of, Tina, there is no alternative way of approaching politics, which is that is undemocratic, or at least it feels undemocratic, because there is no sense of, for me, a government should be involved in trying to make people's lives qualitatively better. And that whole argument has gone out the window.
Liz Truss thought she was doing that. That was a different choice.
At least she used the G word.
But the question that we also have to ask ourselves is whose lives when there are finite resources, right? So, I mean, if something like this came along, for the reasons that Trevor said, I would be voting against it too, because it would be penalising the young. It would likely be penalising the old. Very often, people who are living on their own can barely afford it. They've already got... not someone else to share it with. I know so many people, young people in London, who, if they didn't have this, it would absolutely devastate them. It's so expensive, let alone Oxford and the rest of the country where we've also got those issues. So we have to be really careful, and that's where your principles come in, right? So as Liberal Democrats, when we look at any policy like this, how would we vote with it, against it, whatever? We'd be looking at, well, our principles have always been redistributive. In wherever you've got public spending, taxation, the broadest shoulder should carry the greatest burden. And because there are primarily vulnerable groups who will be affected by this, that would, in our view, be probably a bad idea unless you had some kind of way of protecting the most vulnerable. And that's where the budget's going to be really important. So in the Liberal Democrat manifesto, we set out the wealth taxes that we think we should have, reversing, for example, the banking levy that was removed by the last government. There's a few areas where you can find some money, and we would be looking to the government to see, are they going to do that? And are they then going to use that money to protect the most vulnerable from these policies? So I think we've got to see both. We've got to see what they're planning to do, but also where are they going to raise taxes? And if it isn't on the broader shoulders, then we would have a problem with that as Liberal Democrats.
Alec Shelbrooke, what's your view on whether Labour will seek to phase out the single-person discount on council tax?
Well, they'll probably fudge it, won't they? They'll probably give it as a choice to the councils and say, it's the choice of each council as to whether they get rid of the discount. And then you can step back from that and say, well, we just devolved it down to your local authority. You have local elections. You can cast that each year on the whole in many areas. So that's, if they're going to do something on that lines, I suspect they'll pass it down to local councils and therefore not have to increase the council grant as much as they would, saying, well, you now have choices in, and they'll probably take the cap off how far you can raise council tax. That would probably be the
terrifying.
way.
I mean, putting my health and social care hat on again. So much of what we have locally is determined by the budgets of councils. They are on their knees. So to do something like that, there would be certainly public health consequences if they decided to.
But I think,
cut
just in
even
answer
more.
to that question, what do you think they'll do? I think they'll pass it down to another elected body and let them make the decision.
And if they did that, would you support it?
No, I don't think so. Right, let's get down to basics here. I don't think we should be removing the 25% cap for a couple of reasons. I think, first of all, it's not a 50% drop, is it? When there's only half the people there, it's 25%. But there are some important points. There's a lot of young people trying to get on the ladder and they live on their own. But you take some of the constituencies, Layla and I in different parts of the country, but we have similar demographics and expensive housing. Now, planning policy over the years, there's a lot of really expensive villages in the constituency which don't have smaller houses around them. Now, you got married and you got married and you brought up some children and, your children moved away and, you retired. Now your partner has died after maybe 50 years and you're still living in that family home. Now, your pension's going to get reduced because the other partner's gone. Now, you may be able to get a 25% discount, but now you can't. And you're seeing your resources go just purely through a death. And you'll find it very difficult to downsize if you want to stay in the community you were brought up in. These are the things which I think, are they unforeseen circumstances? But there's certainly things which are going to happen and affect people. And I think, therefore, when we're looking at... do we trap people into a tax area for something that's worked well for such a long time? That's something we have to consider.
Layla, I noticed Layla's against all cuts at the moment. Every time I interviewed your guys, none of them seem to be very keen on tax rises. Are you going to support some tax rises?
Well, I just described one of them. So the reversal of so in the last government, they... cut the banking levy, so banks were able to get an extra $4 billion. We would levy tax on the banks, for example. We would.
Yeah,
so if you look back,
$4 billion that's quite a dodgy figure.
There's more to it than that, and you'll have
anyway,
noticed,
it's not very much.
You'll have noticed that in our manifesto it was fully costed, and the IFS did look at it and gave it, as good a clean bill of health, in fact, better than the Conservative one.
But you weren't.
But the IFS give results all the time and then change them next week. So.
I'm really interested in you guys don't like any. You guys don't like any of these moves, and I'm just wondering where you would get the 10 or 20 or 30 billion that we need to be talking about.
Well, this is why we need the budget, right? Because we need to understand where this has come from. And the other thing that we want to do as Liberal Democrats is be bolder. You know, there are some big changes that need to be made. A good example being social care. And you'll remember also interviewing our lot, and that was a key plank of our manifesto.
Yeah, you want to spend more money. My question is, where's the money coming from?
The reason being that if you sort out social care in the medium and longer term, you end up saving money elsewhere, particularly in the most expensive bits of the NHS, right? So, and we weren't even counting that in our manifesto.
Yeah, and long term we're all dead. We're getting the money for the next 4 or 5 years.
We are looking at the medium and longer term, and we are going to be pushing the government to make the decisions that are best for the country in the medium and longer term.
OK, more of your questions coming up. No doubt that all eyes around this table will be firmly on the budget when it is delivered, and I'm sure yours will be as well. We will be back after the news headlines at 8:30, which come from Charlotte Morgan.
Union leaders are calling on the Prime Minister to rethink plans to cut some winter fuel payments for pensioners. The allowance will only go to those on benefits. Some Labour MPs are expected to rebel against their own party during a vote tomorrow. Domestic abuse charities are warning releasing some prisoners will come at the expense of women and children's safety. Around 1,700 inmates are expected to be let out tomorrow in an attempt to ease overcrowding in prisons. And the Princess of Wales says she's planning to return to some public duties after announcing she's finished chemotherapy. Kate says her focus is doing what she can to stay cancer-free. LBC weather, rain pushing across the north overnight, clearing to showers as it moves southeastwards, drier in the south with a low of 5.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Or you can text us at 84850, which is what Rob in Newcastle has done. And his question for the panel, is it time for a complete end to all arms licensing to Israel following David Lammy's recent move to limit the awarding of those licenses? Ella Whelan.
No, I think that move would it would mean that we have decided to stop backing Israel's war against Hamas. And, you know, nobody, I think anyone sensible can see that this has become an incredibly complicated and tragic picture. As much as I want Hamas defeated, the deaths and tragedy and destruction in Gaza is, you know, incomprehensible and horrendous. But that doesn't change the fact that of the hostages remaining, the fact of what Hamas did on the 7th of October, and the history of that region and all that comes with it. And the problem I had with Lammy's, I think, very performative and posturing announcement was it was neither, you know, it sort of pretended to have some kind of moral weight in terms of objecting to decisions made by Israel, but at the same time was, went to great lengths to say, of course I still support, of course our support hasn't changed, this isn't an arms embargo. And so you thought, it was sort of disingenuous. Say what you mean and stick by your principles if this is something that you feel very strongly about. And, I think we have to see what the war against Hamas and everything that Hamas and other Islamist groups in the region stand for is not just Israel's fight, but it's also ours. In that way, it's similar to what's happening in relation to Ukraine and Russia. There is an immediacy to what's going on in that region and a kind of specificness to it, and the specificness of the pogrom of the 7th of October. But there's also a bigger existential question for Western countries all over the world about what kind of threat is, and what kind of ideological threat is posed by groups like Hamas or Hezbollah or anything like that, and what our position is on that. So I think it's, I don't want them to stop supporting Israel, and we can have a nuanced discussion to say that doesn't mean that I think Israel is angelic and completely right and absolutely okay in everything it's doing. War is not black and white like that.
Layla Moran, you are, we should remind people, the Liberal Democrats' foreign affairs spokesperson. What's your view on whether David Lammy went far enough?
Well, at the time, I've always tried through this whole thing. My mother is Palestinian. I have had family members die in Gaza, who luckily we've managed to get the rest out. But frankly, let's be honest, it's because of my position. And there are so many hundreds of thousands, millions who are still there. And I wish I could do that for every single one of them. At the time that this was announced, I was answering the House and I welcomed it. Because at some point, given the devastation, given that there are ongoing cases at the International Court of Justice and arrest warrants potentially being issued by the International Criminal Court about the international human rights law on the ground and how it's potentially being violated, we believe that this is the time to be sending very strong signals to the Netanyahu government about what they are able to do and not. And so I welcomed it, but I did say it didn't go far enough. One of the things that they did in order to keep it to a small number, it's 30 out of 350, is just restrict what they looked at to Gaza itself, but also not to what's happening in the West Bank. And that's incredibly important because the tinderbox that is that region, if the West Bank sets alight, that is going to be incredibly serious indeed. So I think that they fudged it, and my position and the party's position has always been where there are credible human rights abuses happening on the ground, you don't have to prejudge them. Where there's a risk of it happening, we shouldn't be selling arms, not just to Israel, but any nation that is under risk of doing that. And frankly, it's past time now. Margaret Thatcher had an arms embargo on Israel back in the day when they weren't doing things as much as this. And separately, we should be prescribing the IRGC. We should be taking a stronger stance on Iran. I absolutely agree that we should be stopping, arms and money flowing to people like Hamas, but also the Houthis, also Hezbollah. You can do both things at the same time, but we at some point need to put our morals where our mouths are and say to Israel, this has gone too far. You need to stop now. You are not going to be using British arms to do this. Alec Shelbrooke.
Yeah, and I think actually this is one of the really important political discussions. Layla, we've spoken in the House of Commons, and Layla and I don't agree, and come at it from very different angles, and I probably support everything Ella said. But going down to the substance of what happened last week, it was just posturing of the worst kind, because Layla's just touched on it. Look, we're talking about Hamas, we're talking about Hezbollah, we're talking about the Houthis, not a word about Iran. We know who is supplying the arms. We know who is stirring this up even further. So they focus on, we're going to stop 30 licences to Israel. That was a virtual signalling and a posturing, which, by the way, personally I thought was outrageous, and the people he was trying to satisfy I thought it was ridiculous and didn't go far enough. But nothing about
it didn't seem to please anyone.
No, because it was just I don't think, going back to the previous discussion, there's no conviction to it. It's just trying to play a game.
Well, it was a
and
bit
I'd rather see, maybe.
Yeah.
But, yeah, okay, and so we could probably agree with that, but where's the comments about Iran? And that's the point, it's focusing on Israel.
Andrew Mitchell agreed with it, because and then he pointed out that actually this was done under a process that he started.
Yeah,
so the whole
legal process.
The whole thing felt very processy, and at no point did actually, where are the morals underpin this? Where's the moral argument? Well, one way or another.
Let me get to Trevor's answer to the question, and then we've got a caller who actually, I think, wants to broaden this question out. But Trevor, what's your view on what David Lammy did and whether it went far enough?
Well, briefly, I largely agree with what Ella said at the beginning of this discussion, and I completely respect Layla's engagement and knowledge, actually, of this situation. But as you said, they can do two things at one time, but that isn't what they did here. They did one thing, and that thing was aimed at Israel. It is a matter of signals, because we know it will have absolutely no impact whatsoever on the conflict. I think our arms exports to Israel are less than a fraction of 1% of arms exports to Israel. I think it will have three impacts, all of which, in my view, are bad. Secondly, first of all, it gives Benjamin Netanyahu another line in his bow that the world is against us, actually. It strengthened Netanyahu's, and I don't think many people today think that Netanyahu is going to be part of the solution to this situation. Secondly, it really, really hacked off the Americans, because I don't think they knew, and it is clear that they don't like it. And the third thing, which I think it's more of an issue perhaps about the Foreign Office and its skills. They did this on the day that Israel recovered 6 hostages from Gaza. I mean, tasteless. I mean, beyond, the timing was just shocking.
OK, let's go to our next question, because it is a related question, and it comes from Grace in Ealing. Grace, good evening to you.
Good evening. I'd first just offer condolences to Layla regarding her bereavement. I'm so sorry. I am concerned about people in Gaza. I'm confused as to why, though, we don't talk more about people who are also suffering in some other situations in our world. That's not in any way to say that we shouldn't be talking about the horrors going on in Gaza. But I think, for example, about how sometimes it's in the news that some people here in the UK are needing to use food banks, and people are rightly concerned that that's the situation. And yet, when there are people in some parts of Africa, particularly those who have been affected by the conflict in Sudan, also in Afghanistan, and there was at last a report on this on the BBC News last night, who are really, really, literally starving to death, not just using food banks. Very few people seem to talk about it or take an interest. I know some do, but I just wonder what the panel's view is as to why some human beings' suffering doesn't seem to matter to us. We can rightly be concerned about some human beings who are near to us, but we don't seem to be concerned about very, very severe suffering further afield, which we could make a difference to.
Layla, what's your view on that?
Well, I mean, Grace, when I was growing up, we lived all over, and we moved to Ethiopia in Addis Ababa when I was 5, and I traced back, how did I become political? And I remember seeing and meeting children my age in Ethiopia, and we were just playing, and then, having a conversation with my parents about why they had absolutely nothing, and we were going back to a compound where we had everything, because, when you're a kid, you don't know which questions are allowed to be asked and which aren't. And I remember my father at the time saying it was under a dreadful dictator called Mengistu, who was funneling aid and any money from the economy into arms so that he could fight a war with Eritrea. And there were military parades outside the house every day, and he pointed my father to the military parade, and he said, well, the money is being used to be spent on that and not on the food for the children that you met. And that very much informed my politics. We, as Liberal Democrats, believe that we should be reinstating the 0.7% of gross national income towards aid. We believe that that's the right thing to do for a number of reasons. There is a moral argument that you've made of. We are all humans on this planet together. There's a lot of things that we have to face, but actually there's a lot of good that Britain can do across the world. And in the context of the rest of the world, We are certainly lucky, but I don't think it's an either-or. You also should be tackling the issues of food banks in this country too, and we should be able to do both. We shouldn't be presenting it as, either you talk about food banks or other people starving in the rest of the world. You should be able to do both.
And Ella Whelan, what's your view on this idea that there are other significant problems overseas? Sudan, Afghanistan, we did an hour last week about the plight of women in Afghanistan that are not getting the attention they deserve while this focus is on the Middle East.
Well, there's an interesting phenomenon that people like Jake Wallace-Simons have written about, which is the idea of Israelophobia, of treating Israel as a uniquely evil and special state that does uniquely evil things as opposed to other states which do similar things. And I think I don't agree with Jake on lots of his assessment of Israel, but certainly I think it's onto something there, which is that there is, and it's partly why there is such a growth in anti-Semitism in this country, because there has been a sort of slippage in the way in which we talk about Israel in this sort of unique way. And it's not to say that there should be no criticism or anything like that, but it's kind of like the Israel button is the one that a lot of politicians and commentators go for when they want to be emotive or talk about something or seem principled, and it doesn't match up with their other, it doesn't even match up with the discussion about Iran, for example. And I think that there's something in there to interrogate, which maybe is what Grace is getting at.
Trevor, briefly?
Yeah, just very briefly. Grace, I wouldn't get too depressed about this. I mean, this may sound a bit cruel, but just bear in mind that most of the rest of the world isn't thinking about us most of the time. My family comes from what used to be the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, Guyana, and I have to tell you, we weren't particularly thinking that much about what was happening here. We're trying to get on with what we were dealing with there. But the only other thing I would say is don't be too depressed by the fact that politicians might not be talking about it, or it's not in the pages of the Daily Mail. There are lots of people who campaign on these issues in different places. I chair an organisation called Index on Censorship, which is about freedom of expression, particularly for journalists and artists in different parts of the world, in Kenya and Latin America and Egypt and so on. And I think we do make a difference. So if you worry about these things and you've got your favourite catastrophe, there will be somebody there with whom you can work and who you can campaign and through whom you can make a difference. Don't put it all down to governments.
OK. More of your questions to our panel coming up on LBC's Cross Question, where the time is 13 minutes to 9.
LBC. Cross Question on LBC.
Taking your questions to Sir Alec Shelbrooke, Conservative Member of Parliament, Layla Moran, Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament, the broadcaster Sir Trevor Phillips, and Ella Whelan, a columnist with Spiked Online. And our next question comes over text from Jonathan, who says, is the campaign to overturn Lucy Letby's many convictions not completely disrespectful to the families affected by her crimes? And the context of this is that the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, told LBC's Lewis Goodall yesterday that the public campaigns to overturn the 7 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder of babies for which former nurse Lucy Letby has been convicted is crass and insensitive. So, Alec Shelbrooke, what is your view about this campaign and also about the safety of those convictions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we're seeing here is this algorithm of social media once more and trial by social media. And I think it, again, just tries to undermine the process of law in this country. Look, this was a trial. It was heard. There is rights of appeal. Look, we have seen unsafe convictions in the past and things, but there is a process. What appears to be happening here is that it starts off online with, for whatever reason, maybe it's conspiracy theories or maybe somebody knows something or maybe they say something and it gets bigger and it's there. And I worry that what we're actually losing is faith in the judicial process. And I think that this is another one of the consequences of bringing so many people together in an algorithm on social media that it grows and it grows and it grows and it grows. And is it disrespectful to the victims? Of course it is, in the way that it's being done. Does that mean it should never go to an appeal if new evidence comes forward? Of course it doesn't. But we have to have faith in the judicial process and the checks and balances that are in place. Not everything is a conspiracy.
Judicial process makes mistakes, Layla Moran.
It does, and that's why we've got, appeals processes, and I feel very uncomfortable by this simply because I don't know enough about the case, and I don't feel, all I saw was what was reported. I was not a juror. I didn't see the whole breadth of the arguments put in front of them, but the outcome was pretty emphatic. And meanwhile, we've got grieving families, and we saw their testimonies in the aftermath, breaking down still in front of cameras many years later, going through this grieving. It's very, very difficult, but we have to rely on the process. And if you lose faith in our processes in this country, I believe in our judiciary. I think there'd be a massive problem if we all lost faith in that. We really should trust in it. And unfortunately, if it turns out that we were all wrong in, 5 years' time, when it turns out she was innocent, I want to go through those processes and have it be looked at in the round, in the detail that it deserves, because the families, frankly, deserve nothing less.
Is there something wrong with the campaign, though, Trevor Phillips? I mean, there was a campaign for the Guildford Four.
Yeah, I'm kind of with Wes Streeting on this, and this is a matter of tone as much as anything else, to be honest. I think, as Alex and Layla both said, there is... we have a structure in this country that allows for appeals, allows for a process. One of the things that I did very early on in my journalistic career that I was proud of was that there were 3 men who had been convicted for a series of murders. We did an investigation, and it turned out that there had been a miscarriage of justice. At least the case was not proven, and they were freed. And one of them actually is now a fellow reporter and has made something of his life. I think, though, that there are ways and ways in which you can pursue this, and I think Alex's point about the way this is being done on social media and the tone with which it's being pursued is one which is not reasonable. It is not necessary. It's unlikely, actually, to lead to a good or fair outcome, and it is certain to hurt the people who are the relatives of those who died.
Ella Whelan?
It's ghoulish, I think, the obsession with the idea that she's innocent, and I agree with all the points of processes being properly paid attention to and the legal system working as it should. Chris Snowden's written a really good article in Spiked on the Lucy Letby case, just, detailing what we know about the evidence and the reasons why she was convicted. And I'm no lawyer, but it was convincing enough for me to form my own opinions about it. The backdrop to all of this is that we've got a serious scandal scandal in maternity care. So there's the Lucy Letby case, which is a specific thing in criminality. And then there is also a question to be asked about hospital practices and babies dying, not from some evil doings by an individual, but through medical negligence. And that's complicating the picture. But I'd be much more interested in having that discussion than re-raking over Letby's case.
OK. Changing gears completely. Sarah on text asks, are glitzy social media influencer-type videos now going to be the norm for royal communications, and should they be? That is a reference to the video that has been produced tonight by the Princess of Wales announcing that she's completed her chemotherapy and hopes to remain cancer-free. Brief answers from you on this.
Why
Alec?
not?
Why not?
Why not? Put it out on all platforms.
Effective means of communication?
Put it out on all platforms.
Layla?
I'm watching it now. It looks lovely. It's the first. I've not had a chance to see it in full, but it seems to be having an impact. And if it gets people talking about, cancer care and what she's been through, and I think that's only a good thing to open those conversations.
Trevor?
I think that response is a bit mean, to be honest. I've watched it. It's as a piece of craft, as a documentary maker, it's a beautiful piece of work, just in it and of itself. And the message is good. It will uplift all people who have suffered from cancer. Nothing wrong with this at all. And for God's sake, it's 2024. Instagram, I'm not on Instagram, but it is one of the means of communication. What's she want to do? I mean, does she want Kate to send something out with a quill pen? I mean, come on.
I mean, it seemed to me, I think it's roughly a 3-minute video. It's not actually really social media friendly, particularly. It's not TikTok.
Well, I don't mind being mean because I don't agree with the royals being in the position that they're in. And while it's a very lovely, well-done piece of aesthetic documentary making, I think the turn towards celebrity in the royals is bizarre. I find it incredible. It creates an uncomfortable position for them, which is that they're courting public opinion on social media or anywhere else, or with their various campaigns, acting like celebrities while maintaining the status and privilege of a family appointed by bloodline. And so, the thing that I like about these things is it allows me a little bit of time and space on the airways to ask people whether or not the royals should be in place, cancer or no cancer, in the modern era. And so, yeah, bring on the videos.
Alec? I mean, if the king did the same, how would you feel about that?
Well, no, I think with all respect, that there is a role to raise awareness for people who are seen as completely apolitical. And I think that's one of the great advantages we have in this country is an apolitical head of state and the family around it. People are always demanding that the royal family do more, that they have more relevance. Look, as an absolute out-and-out... and I was just going to say, as an out-and-out monarchist, I will always defend the royal family and what they do. I do think that good can come out of things. There's very little polarisation in relative terms compared to everything else we may have been discussing tonight and anything else on positions the royal family take, and I think it's helpful. I think the king actually discussing his cancer diagnosis, there's a lot of cancer charities have said that was an exceptionally helpful thing to do, and I think the Princess of Wales, a young woman who has gone through extreme treatment, that's basically all we know, again saying to people, look, you're not alone.
And that, by the way, is one of the things that does make her difference. She hasn't told us some of the things that I think some of so-called celebrities would tell us. I think it's fantastically well judged. She has said what needs to be said, what the public needs to know. It means that journalists don't have to crawl all over fences to find out things. Yeah. But we don't know things that, frankly, we do not need to know.
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
We move on, finally, to close with our fun question of the night, as we do at the end of every edition of Cross Question. It comes tonight from Harriet in Brighton, who says, with the country still in Oasis fever, Noel Gallagher's photo is being added to the National Portrait Gallery's upcoming Legends exhibition. Who else belongs in a gallery of national legends and why? Layla Moran.
Gosh. I outed myself as a Star Trek fan in Parliament last week. I felt very proud of myself to get a reference in. And Next Generation was my series, so Patrick Stewart.
Patrick Stewart, that's interesting. Alec?
So I'm 48 years old, and I often think that you have sporting peerages related to your age. Now, I'm a West Ham fan, but I'd always say David Beckham. My footballing hero, David Beckham, and I think it's probably in there,
well,
actually.
That's I suppose there is a concession to the possibility that is there already, Trevor.
Well, the one figure who has survived through every regime, entirely popular, the country loves him, Larry the Cat.
Good answer.
We've been talking about principals and MPs all evening, and I think Bernadette Devlin is a good candidate. She was the youngest MP when she was elected in 1969, representative of a liberatory movement that's still relevant today, and she punched the Home Secretary when he went against her principles, which to me is the true test of a politician's mettle. So.
I'm moving along the desk now.
Yeah.
It was a different time.
Lovely answers from all of you. My thanks tonight to Sir Alec Shelbrooke, the Conservative Shadow Transport Minister and MP for Wetherby and Easingwold, Layla Moran, the Liberal Democrats Foreign Affairs and International Development spokesman, the MP for Oxford West and Abingdon, the broadcaster Sir Trevor Phillips, a former chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and Ella Whelan, a columnist for Spiked Online. Tomorrow night, Cross Questions panel will comprise the former Conservative Cabinet Minister Sir Robert Buckland, the social activist Nimco Ali, the broadcaster and former SNP MP John Nicholson, and the journalist David Aronovich. We'll see you back here for more Cross Question tomorrow night at 8. In our final hour together this evening, the kids are definitely not all right. That is the conclusion of a new report that says behaviour in the classroom is getting worse and worse. Absenteeism sparked by the COVID-19 lockdowns continues to bedevil schools across the UK, and learning difficulties including arrested language development and even a lack of toilet training are also spiking upwards. Meanwhile, a former head of Ofsted is urging teachers to call out bad parenting. He says they may be fueling the lack of discipline in the classroom. If you're a teacher, are you ready for those conversations? If you're a parent, are you ready for those conversations? And if you're a kid in school, tell us what it was like there today. Are you able to learn among all the disruptions?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.